10 years ago, I stood in the corner of my nephew's wedding reception, watching my family pose for what they called the official family portrait. I was 42 then, recently divorced, and apparently no longer worthy of being included in the frame that would hang in living rooms and grace Christmas cards for years to come. "We need to keep this tight," my sister-in-law Helen had said, her voice carrying that practiced authority of someone used to getting her way. "Just immediate family for this one." She gestured for me to step aside, making room for her sister who'd married into the family just 6 months earlier. I'd watched from the sidelines as they arranged themselves perfectly. My brother Mark, Helen, their son the groom, the new bride, Helen's parents, her sister and brother-in-law. The photographer captured their smiles, their unity, their vision of what family looked like. And I wasn't in it. "Don't worry, Aunt Carol," my nephew Jake had whispered to me later, "we'll take another one with you." But that other photo never made it to the mantelpiece. It never appeared in their Christmas cards or social media posts. It remained buried in a phone somewhere while the official version became the family's public face. Now, at 52, I stood in the same church where Jake had married his first wife, watching him prepare to marry his second. But this time, I wasn't standing in the corner. This time, I was holding something that would change everything, a photograph that told a different story about who really belonged in this family. The decade between those two weddings had been a journey of rediscovering my worth after years of accepting less than I deserved. After Jake's first wedding, I tried to convince myself that being excluded from the family photo was just an oversight, a moment of poor judgment in the chaos of wedding planning. But as the months passed and that photo appeared everywhere, framed in my brother's house, shared on social media, printed in holiday cards, I realized it wasn't an accident. It was a statement. The message was clear: divorced women, women without husbands to validate their place in the family hierarchy, were expendable, temporary, not quite family enough to be permanently documented. I'd spent years being the reliable aunt, the one who remembered birthdays and showed up for graduations, who babysat during emergencies and sent thoughtful gifts. But when it came time to capture the family legacy, I was deemed unnecessary. Helen's sister, who barely knew Jake's middle name, was more worthy of inclusion than the aunt who'd helped raise him. The exclusion had stung more than I'd admitted at the time. I'd gone home that night and looked through old family photos, searching for evidence of my belonging. There I was at Jake's high school graduation, beaming with pride. There I was at family Christmas mornings, surrounded by wrapping paper and laughter. There I was at my parents' anniversary party, organizing the celebration that brought everyone together. But somehow, when it came to the official version of our family story, I'd been edited out. The years that followed had taught me something valuable about visibility and worth. I'd built a successful consulting business, traveled to places I'd only dreamed of, formed friendships with people who valued me for who I was rather than my marital status. I'd learned that my value wasn't determined by whether someone chose to include me in their frame. But I'd also learned something else. Sometimes, when people try to erase you from their story, the most powerful thing you can do is show them the story they missed. Jake's second wedding was smaller, more intimate than his first. His marriage to Ashley had ended in divorce 3 years earlier, ironically, making him part of the club that had once made me unworthy of family photos. The guest list was carefully curated, limited to people who'd supported him through the difficult years that followed his divorce. I'd been surprised to receive an invitation at all. After years of feeling like a peripheral family member, I'd assumed my role would remain that of the aunt who sent gifts but wasn't quite important enough for major celebrations. But Jake had personally called to invite me, his voice carrying a warmth I hadn't heard in years. "Aunt Carol, I really want you there," he'd said. "I know things have been complicated with the family dynamics, but you've always been important to me. I hope you'll come." The wedding was beautiful in its simplicity. Jake's new bride, Maria, was a warm, genuine woman who'd seen him through his darkest moments and helped him rebuild his life. Unlike his first wedding, which had been more about spectacle than substance, this celebration felt authentic, focused on love rather than appearances. As the reception began, I found myself genuinely enjoying the evening. The conversation was real, the laughter unforced, the atmosphere filled with the kind of joy that comes from people who've learned to value what truly matters. I was seated at a table with Jake's close friends, people who welcomed me warmly and treated me like the valued family member I'd always been to Jake. But then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating, the family photo session. Helen approached the photographer with her usual commanding presence, beginning to arrange people for the formal portraits. "Let's get the family shot first," she announced, her voice carrying across the reception area. Immediate family only for the official photo. I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. The old wound reopening as I prepared to be relegated to the sidelines once again. But this time, I wasn't going to stand quietly in the corner. This time, I had something to say. Standing there watching Helen orchestrate another family photo that would exclude me, I felt the weight of 10 years of silence pressing down on my shoulders. Part of me wanted to simply walk away, to avoid the confrontation and maintain the fragile peace I'd worked so hard to build with my family. The old Carol would have smiled politely and found somewhere else to be during the photo session. But I wasn't the old Carol anymore. The decades since Jake's first wedding had changed me in ways I was still discovering. I'd learned to value myself independent of others' recognition. I'd built a life that didn't require anyone's permission or approval. I'd found my voice in boardrooms and business meetings, in friendships and personal relationships. Yet here I was, feeling that familiar shrinking sensation, that automatic impulse to make myself smaller to avoid making others uncomfortable. It was remarkable how quickly family dynamics could transport you back to old patterns, old wounds, old ways of being that you thought you'd outgrown. I thought about the photograph tucked safely in my purse, the one I'd brought specifically for this moment. It had taken me months to decide whether to bring it, whether to risk the confrontation it would inevitably cause. But looking at Helen arranging people like chess pieces, preparing to erase me from another family memory, I knew I'd made the right choice. The photograph in my purse told a different story than the one Helen wanted to preserve. It was a story about who had really been there during the difficult times, who had shown up when showing up mattered, who had earned their place in the family through love and loyalty rather than marriage certificates and social expectations. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my purse. This wasn't just about a photograph, it was about reclaiming my narrative, about refusing to be edited out of my own family story. It was about standing up for every woman who'd ever been deemed less worthy because she didn't fit someone else's definition of family. The moment had come to stop being invisible. As Helen began positioning family members for the photo, I walked toward the group with purposeful steps. The photographer was adjusting his camera, preparing to capture what Helen considered the real family, the same configuration that had excluded me a decade earlier. "Wait," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the reception area. "Before you take that photo, I have something I'd like to share." Helen's face tightened with annoyance. "Carol, we're trying to get the formal photos done. Perhaps we could talk later?" But I was already reaching into my purse, my fingers closing around the photograph I'd carried with me like a talisman. "Actually, I think this is exactly the right time." The family members who'd been arranged for the photo began to shift uncomfortably. My brother Mark looked confused, Jake appeared curious, and Maria watched with the careful attention of someone trying to understand family dynamics she'd only recently joined. I pulled out the photograph and held it up for everyone to see. It was an 8x10 print, professionally reproduced from a digital image I'd discovered while going through old files on my computer. The photo showed Jake at age 8, in a hospital bed, his small face pale but smiling. Beside him sat a woman reading him a story, her hand gently holding his. "This was taken 12 years ago," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. "Jake had pneumonia and was hospitalized for a week. Do you remember who stayed with him every night when his parents had to work?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see recognition dawning on faces around the group, memories surfacing that had been conveniently forgotten when it came time to define family boundaries. "I do," Jake said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You did, Aunt Carol. You slept in that uncomfortable chair for 6 nights straight." I nodded, still holding the photograph. "I have dozens of pictures like this," Jake's first steps, I was there because you were at a conference, Mark. His high school graduation speech, I helped him write it during our weekly dinners. His college move-in day, I drove the rental truck because you had the flu, Helen. Helen's face had gone pale. Carol, I don't see what this has to do with it. It has everything to do with family. I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. Real family. The kind that shows up. The tension in the reception area was palpable as I continued to hold up the photograph, this piece of evidence that challenged the narrative Helen had spent years constructing. Other wedding guests had begun to notice the drama unfolding, conversations quieting as people sensed something significant was happening. For 10 years, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space, I've watched that family photo from Jake's first wedding hang in living rooms and appear on Christmas cards. A photo that told the world who mattered in this family and who didn't. I turned to address not just Helen, but everyone gathered around us. Helen's sister made it into that photo. A woman who'd been in the family for 6 months, who barely knew Jake's favorite color, was deemed more worthy of inclusion than the aunt who'd been there for every milestone, every crisis, every moment that mattered. Jake stepped forward, his face flushed with what looked like shame and realization. And Carol, I never knew you felt, of course you didn't know, I said gently, not wanting to blame him for decisions made by others. You were focused on your wedding, on starting your new life. But the adults in this family made choices about who belonged and who didn't, and those choices said everything about their values. I held up another photograph I'd brought, this one showing me at Jake's college graduation, beaming with pride as I stood next to him in his cap and gown. This is from your graduation day. Do you remember what you said to me that afternoon? Jake's eyes filled with tears as the memory surfaced. I said you were like a second mother to me, that I couldn't have made it through college without your support. And yet, I continued, my voice breaking slightly, when it came time to document your family for posterity, I was erased, edited out, deemed unworthy of permanent inclusion in your story. Helen finally found her voice, but it came out defensive and sharp. Carol, you're being dramatic. It was just a photo. We took others. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. It wasn't just a photo. It was a statement about value, about belonging, about who gets to be remembered and who gets forgotten. And I'm done being forgotten. I pulled out one final photograph, this one recent, showing me with Jake during his divorce proceedings, sitting in a lawyer's office, my hand on his shoulder as he signed papers that would end his first marriage. This was taken 3 years ago, I said, my voice now strong and clear. When Jake's perfect first marriage fell apart, when the family photo from his first wedding became a painful reminder of failure, who do you think he called? Who sat with him through the darkest period of his life? Who helped him rebuild when everything fell apart? The silence was absolute. Even Helen seemed to have run out of words. I continued. The woman who wasn't worthy of the family photo was the one who held this family together when it mattered most. I turned to Jake, my voice softening. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, sweetheart. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something important. Family isn't about who looks good in photos. It's about who shows up when showing up is hard. Then I looked directly at Helen, and I've been showing up for 30 years. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Jake stepped away from the arranged photo group and walked directly to where I stood. Without saying a word, he wrapped me in a hug that felt like an apology, a recognition, and a promise all at once. You're right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've always been there. You've always been family. And anyone who can't see that doesn't understand what family really means. He turned to the photographer, who had been watching this drama unfold with fascination. Change of plans. I want a photo with the people who've actually been there for me. The people who've earned their place through love, not just biology or marriage certificates. Maria stepped forward first, followed by several of Jake's close friends who'd supported him through his divorce. Then, to everyone's surprise, my brother Mark joined the group, his face reflecting years of guilt finally coming to the surface. Carol's right, he said quietly. We've taken her for granted for too long. The photo that was taken that day became the one that mattered, not because it was official or formal, but because it was real. It showed Jake surrounded by the people who'd actually shaped his life, who'd been present for the moments that defined him. Helen stood apart from the group, her carefully constructed vision of family hierarchy crumbling around her. But I felt no satisfaction in her discomfort, only relief that the truth had finally been spoken. Later, as the evening wound down, Jake found me on the terrace overlooking the garden. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see," he said simply. "I'm sorry I let them make you invisible." "You didn't make me invisible," I replied, looking out at the stars. "I allowed myself to become invisible, but I'm done with that now." That night, I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be erased from your own story. Sometimes you have to show people the pictures they don't want to see, the truths they'd rather forget, the evidence of love that doesn't fit their narrow definitions. And sometimes, just sometimes, they finally understand what they almost lost. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or erased from your own family's narrative, remember this: your presence in people's lives has value that goes beyond formal recognition. But you also have the right to demand that your contributions be acknowledged and your place be honored. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own worth today. Subscribe for more stories about women who refuse to be edited out of their own lives, who find the courage to show the world the pictures that matter. Because every woman who has loved faithfully, shown up consistently, and given generously deserves to be seen, remembered, and included. Sometimes the most powerful moment in our lives is when we stop accepting invisibility and start demanding to be seen.